Morning, everyone. We apologize for the delay. Let me just briefly say we had a robust discussion in the caucus this morning, largely centered around the importance of moving forward with the National Defense Authorization Act. We had a presentation from Chairman Adam Smith, as well as other members from the Armed Services Committee, all of whom spoke out strongly in favor of the robust nature of the NDAA bill that will be on the floor this week. We also had a very impassioned discussion about moving forward as it relates to the humanitarian crisis that exists on the border. That discussion was led by Chairman Joaquin Castro with participation from Veronica Escobar, who's been a tremendous leader in the effort to turn the situation around in El Paso and throughout the U.S.-Mexican border. With that, let me just yield briefly to Katherine Clark, and I think we'll go to questions. We'll go straight to questions.
So how's the Democratic Party doing? We're hearing a little spat here between Ms. Pelosi and Ford, should we call it?
It's all puppies and rainbows.
On the NDA, obviously progressives are getting a lot of votes on their amendments, but will you guys feel confident about the votes? Is having the votes on these amendments enough to win over some hesitant progressives, or is it going to take more than that too?
Yeah, we are very confident that there will be strong support from all corners of the House Democratic Caucus with respect to the National Defense Authorization Act. The chairman of the Rules Committee and the chairman of the Armed Services Committee have worked closely with the membership to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to have their perspective and their voice and their ideas heard on the floor of the House of Representatives. It's a very open and inclusive process, and we believe that at the end of it, the NDAA will pass with Democratic votes. It will be unfortunate if Republicans decide to vote against the defense of this country because they are too busy playing politics.
So you said that you had an impassioned discussion about the way forward on the border, and you've already kind of gotten rolled by the Senate, including your own party, in increasing protections for the young people who are held there. So what is the way forward? What can you do now?
I would disagree with that characterization. I think the House bill was a strong bill. The Senate bill was a bipartisan bill negotiated by Democrats and Republicans, and many of us said it was a good bill. Some concluded it was not good enough. Others concluded it was good enough to proceed. But now we're at a point where we can move forward, and we will move forward in defense of both the rule of law on the border and in defense of our cherished history as a nation of immigrants.
But what does that look like? What are you exactly going to do?
One of the proposals is taking Dr. Raul Ruiz's bill that would establish medical standards of care for children at the border. So when they initially come into custody, using the standards that have been established internationally that Congressman Ruiz has worked on in Haiti and other places that have been devastated. I can tell you I just went to Homestead, the influx center in Florida, last week, and the doctors there reported they are seeing a true spike in children who are coming in from being held at the border into this center with strep throat, with fevers, infections. We need to make sure that there are basic standards of care for these migrant children and people as they come into care. So taking that bill and getting it passed, saying we have to have some standards that comport with international medical standards throughout the globe to treat these migrants as they come in. We think that something as simple as taking vital signs could have prevented the deaths of children that we've seen at the border. So that's the proposal we're looking at.
Is that bill going to come to the floor, or is it, what's the timing on that?
Yes, so the proposals to take that bill and a bill proposed by Congresswoman Escobar and bring those to the floor and have votes to make sure that we are having those standards of care that we felt Mitch McConnell, when he denied a conference committee on the proposals on the House bill, when the Senate rejected these basic standards, basic ways to make sure that we are treating these migrants as human beings. That we would bring those to the floor and move them as separate pieces of legislation.
Thank you. Good morning. Isn't this entire debate, border, threat of ICE raids, citizenship question of the census, aren't these things all tied together because the Congress has not actually tackled immigration? That's the central issue. We're all talking, these are all tied together. And what's the inherent challenge to get that done?
House Democrats believe that we do have a broken immigration system. We need to fix it in a bipartisan way, and we should proceed with comprehensive immigration reform, starting with the Senate moving the House Dream and Promise Act that we sent over to Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard. The Trump administration has demonstrated itself on the issue of immigration to be incompetent, ineffective, and increasingly inhumane. That is the problem.
But isn't there a problem on the Democratic side? Because you guys haven't moved a comprehensive bill, and the Republican House couldn't either.
There is no problem on the Democratic side. We have a variety of different solutions, beginning with passing the Dream and Promise Act, supported by the overwhelming majority of the American people.
Was there an opportunity missed, though, when you guys left right before the recess to stick around and get something done? Because now there's no pressure really on the Senate to act on the Ruiz-Escobar bill, or, the president asked for a disaster or a humanitarian bill, and then now he's got that. So how do you put the pressure on Republicans to do something else?
Is there ever really pressure on the Senate to act? I mean, at the end of the day, the House is the House, and we move with expeditious effort, often connected to, the problems that we have to confront in this country. And the Senate, often under Mitch McConnell's leadership, takes its time because he'd rather do nothing. At the end of the day, as we often say around this place, public sentiment is everything. Public sentiment, we believe, will be to address the situation on the border. You'll continue to see members of Congress travel down to the border to make the case to the American people that something needs to happen. And we believe that an appropriate starting point is to move the Escobar bill on law enforcement accountability and Dr. Ruiz's bill on humanitarian standards.
Right now, we're not hearing that there are plans to bring the Department of Homeland Security funding bill to the floor before you guys leave for August. Of course, it's 2 out of the 12 bills that haven't been done. When would you bring that up? Do you intend to pass that before the September 30th deadline, which of course would become a conference with the Senate and has a chance to get some of these humanitarian provisions into law?
It's my understanding that it certainly will pass in advance of the September 30th deadline, although the exact timing as to how to proceed, I think, will be determined by the chairman of the Rules Committee and the leadership of Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn.
How would you describe Democrats' ultimate goal with regard to oversight of the Trump administration?
Well, the House is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for Donald Trump. We work for the American people. We recognize that Congress has a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. The Trump administration is often out of control. We will exercise that oversight responsibility aggressively. That is not the Speaker Pelosi playbook. That is not the Jerry Nadler playbook. That is not the House Democratic Caucus playbook. That is the James Madison playbook. The Founding Fathers were clear that Congress is supposed to be a rival to the executive branch because they did not want a king. Donald Trump clearly conducts himself often like a individual with authoritarian tendencies, not someone who is part of a separate and co-equal branch of government in the context of a democracy. We believe the American people are with us as it relates to aggressive oversight.
What result do you
Well, what we are going to see, I think, is to continue to present information to the American people as it relates to the things that are happening within this administration connected to incompetence, ineffectiveness, and inhumane behavior on a variety of different levels.
Following that, was there any discussion today in the caucus about the Mueller testimony, how to proceed? Was there any advice given, number one? And number two, do you expect the Mueller testimony to move the ball at all?
Well, the answer to the first question is no. It was not discussed within the caucus. I believe there's a Judiciary Committee meeting at some point either today or tomorrow to have a discussion about how Democrats are going to proceed. I'll let Katherine answer the question as well. I think, though, that it is important that the American people hear directly from Bob Mueller. We made clear, notwithstanding his initial reluctance, that we thought it was important for Bob Mueller to testify publicly and tell the story to the American people about Russian interference in the election, the Trump campaign's welcoming that assistance, and the obstruction of justice that he outlined in Volume 2 of his report. We expect that all of those subjects will be explored robustly a week from today.
Just before that, you've been reluctant to even mention the I word.
Impeachment?
Yeah. But seriously, what do you want to hear in this testimony that could move you one way or the other? What are you looking for?
Well, the American people should hear about the three principal conclusions that Bob Mueller and his investigators laid out in the report. One, Russia attacked our democracy and interfered with the 2016 presidential election for the purpose of helping Donald Trump and hurting Hillary Clinton. Two, the Trump campaign up to the highest levels, including but not limited to the candidate himself, welcomed that assistance. Three, when a counterintelligence and criminal investigation was launched into this unprecedented attack on our democracy by a foreign enemy spearheaded by a brutal dictator named Vladimir Putin, the Trump campaign or the Trump administration appeared to have engaged in obstruction of justice.
To sort of answer the last three questions together, I would say that our critical role here is one of oversight, and that all of this is an ongoing conversation with the American people and showing exactly what this administration is doing. The power of Bob Mueller coming is to walk through this report in his own words. Many Americans have not been able to read this report. That it is long. They haven't taken that time. No one better than Bob Mueller to come and break it down for the American people and have us help amplify that message. And that goes also to what we're looking at with the possible contempt citations for both Barr and for Wilbur Ross, because we have to get to the bottom of what has happened with this census question, and that all of it, at the end of the day, is the systematic bias, the systematic voting exclusion, the systematic attacks on immigrants that this administration is undertaking. So let's have this oversight. That's our constitutional duty. It's also part of our oath of office to the American people, to let them know, to continue to educate and allow them to examine the record and the motivations of this administration.
Any further questions? Last question.
You said that you would be open to a hearing about the Epstein-Acosta plea agreement. What are some of the obstacles that you think would stand in the way of an investigation like this?
Well, it seems to me that it may fall within the jurisdiction of either the Oversight Committee or the Judiciary Committee to explore the parameters of what happened, why it happened, with respect to the plea agreement, and how do we prevent it from happening again. it's an interesting thing that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle still refuse to denounce or call for the resignation of the disgraced Secretary of Labor. But perhaps we shouldn't be surprised, because this is the same party that gleefully backed an accused pedophile for a seat in the United States Senate in Alabama. Why? Because at the end of the day, many of them don't seem to care about decency. They only seem to care about the accumulation or maintenance of political power. That's a shame.
I would just like to add that it is my understanding that Secretary Acosta is calling a press conference for later today. There are 2 words we need to hear from him. I resign. When he was the U.S. attorney, he had a 53-page indictment with witnesses and victims, over 30 minor children. And what he chose to do was not prosecute. And what he then chose to do was to keep that information from the victims. Let them think that a federal investigation was still going forward. He needs to answer for that. And his comments yesterday that there's new evidence, there may be new evidence in New York, but he had a 53-page indictment put together by his office, was all the evidence that he needed. Instead, he abdicated to wealth and power, chose that over the victims in this case, and let Jeffrey Epstein be sentenced to jail for 13 months on soliciting a prostitution charge, where he was released for 6 hours a day, for 8 hours a day, 6 days a week to continue his job. That is beyond a sweetheart deal. And what it clearly says, and what Secretary Acosta has clearly shown his priority to be when he came before Appropriations in April and said, I want to cut the division of the Department of Labor that looks into child exploitation and trafficking by 80%. This is not a situation that is something about new evidence that has been found or prosecutorial discretion. This was never a close call. And Secretary Acosta is repeated what this administration always does. They choose the powerful and the wealthy over the vulnerable and children. And we see it repeated over and over. So we again are calling for the resignation of Secretary Acosta.
Thank you, Katherine. Let me make one concluding observation about the way forward. The House Democratic Caucus is a diverse family. We are a passionate family. We are a large family. We will remain united in the face of a common enemy named Donald J. Trump. Thank you, everyone.
So late. So late. All right, dude.
Thank you. Thank you. We tried hard.
but I wouldn't have freaked out as much that one time we couldn't find it.